Hello, everyone. My name is Giomar. I'm incredibly excited to welcome everyone to this book launch for the Abolition School's Abolition and Reconstruction Study Guide. Um, I want to thank all of those who've joined us on the stream, and I will repeatedly throughout the course of the conversation be thanking our participants who have joined us from, some of them halfway across the globe to participate in this conversation. As some of you may know, this study guide is the culmination of years of work, at least 2 years of active participatory education at Abolition School, um, and at least 3 years of work overall. But it's important to think about both the moment that the school emerged from and the moment that we find ourselves in. And those moments are very related. I say that in part because we are approaching the fifth anniversary of the Minneapolis rebellions. And I probably don't need to explain the degree to which those rebellions shook the country and the globe, shook the city of Philadelphia in particular. And the Abolition School really grew out of the sort of long wake and the long aftermath of those rebellions, the way that those rebellions reshaped and transformed our political horizons. And this wasn't always in a good way. It's important, especially as we approach the fifth anniversary of the rebellions, to think about the ways in which we've confronted two interlocking dynamics in the immediate aftermath of the rebellions. The first was the open repression of our movements, which has come in waves, which has taken different forms, which affected and impacted us directly at Abolition School. The ways in which sort of members of our team, members of our community, were incarcerated, imprisoned, and targeted in the aftermath of those rebellions. But equally important was the fact that we confronted a situation in which our own categories were being taken away from us, watered down, co-opted, by which I mean abolition and to a certain degree as well, decolonization. And so we confronted both the sort of hard counterinsurgency of state violence and the soft counterinsurgency of the liberal sort of academic and nonprofit reappropriation of our terms. And so we confronted a situation in the years following 2020 in which many people, hundreds of thousands of people, were interested in the question of abolition, interested in doing abolitionist organizing, but not super clear on what it meant to do abolition or how we understand abolition. And so the school as a project and the reader as a sort of, concretization of that project really emerged from these questions, and the questions of, on the one hand, what do we do with these hundreds of thousands of people who have been mobilized? What do we do that doesn't simply allow them to fall back from organizing, fall back from mobilization, and fall into the sort of downturn that the state wants us to fall into? And secondly, how do we use this moment as a way to think about the categories that motivate us, to think about what abolition means, to think about what it means to do abolitionist struggle? And that's where this reader and that's where this project really emerges from. I don't want to say too much before we bring our incredible crew of guests on, but I will say that we began the Abolition School with very, very little in terms of even an understanding of whether we would have readings, whether we would have a curriculum, a curricular structure. We started with a basic and a rough idea of how we understood the world, right? The way that we understand abolition to be and to demand a form of reconstruction. The fact that we understand abolition to be necessarily anti-imperialist, necessarily global and internationalist. The fact that we, understood abolition to embody a demand for self-defense in communities. All of these things were pending questions within sort of abolitionist theory and organizing. And we saw the necessity of intervening in that way with a participatory education program that would be able to build community and build struggle and build movements around these questions, around collective study of these questions. And as we often say, on the one hand, our goal is to build and develop organic intellectuals, leaders from within sort of impacted communities and movements who are able to then do their own theorizing, bring their own ideas to the fore, and make those ideas material in practice. And we also say, of course, fundamentally, that we study the world to change it. That our goal is not simply to understand, that our goal is to intervene, but that our intervention requires not only collective study and sort of the consolidation of community that comes through it, but it also requires a clear analysis and a sharp understanding of how the world works. And so we're incredibly proud of this book. We're proud of this study guide, which includes our full 12-week curriculum, but which also includes facilitators' notes. It includes a description of how we structure each session, of the kinds of participatory activities that we integrate into them. And the goal of this is, above all, to make this text available to study groups, to education programs, to make these readings and this guidance available, and available, we should note, as at a discount for, for study groups. And please reach out to us if you want to build on and work through this study guide. But the goal is for these study groups and these education programs to proliferate, and for this text to be available for that proliferation. As I said, we are incredibly excited to be joined by a really incredible series, and crew of comrades who have been, in a certain way, supporters, inspirations, who have been fellow travelers of this project from the very beginning, some of whom are in the study guide, some of whom have used the study guide to build education programs as well, and are really gracing us with their time and their participation today. And so what I will now do is to once again thank our guests for being here, for being a part of this, for dedicating time and support to this project, and to this launch, and also to introduce all four of our sort of key participants in the conversation tonight. And I'll introduce everyone first, and then I will bring them in one at a time to say a few remarks. And of course, in the spirit of participatory education and conversation, we encourage everyone to be using the chat function to put in your questions, your concerns, to ask, really, take advantage of this incredible opportunity to speak to all of these comrades at once, and to, use this to deepen our own collective understanding. Our first discussant and participant will be the great Melissa Ferrer Seville, a poet, educator, and organizer living on Kaw, Kickapoo, Oseti-Sakowin, and Kanza lands, aka Kansas City, Missouri. Melissa received their Master's in Education and Urban Education from Park University, and their MFA in Poetry from Randolph College. They're the founder and director of an abolitionist arts and organizing event series called A Nation in Exile. They are, and really this is what always blows me away, the first poet laureate of Kansas City, Missouri, and particularly of interest to this conversation, they're the director of Be Real Academy, the Black Radical Education for Abolition and Liberation, which is organized in conjunction with the Kansas City Defender. Our second, discussant will be Dylan Rodriguez, a parent, teacher, scholar, organizer, and collaborator who is also technically employed as distinguished professor at the University of California, Riverside, where he has worked since 2001. Dylan's a faculty member in the Department of Black Study in the Department of Media and Cultural Studies, and was previously a member of the Department of Ethnic Studies. He is the former president of the American Studies Association, no less. He is a freedom scholar and has served as co-director for the Center for Ideas and Society, where he created the Decolonizing Humanism programming stream. He has participated, and we first, met way back in the California scene when he was participating in Critical Resistance, Abolition Collective, Critical Ethnic Studies Association, Cops Off Campus, Scholars for Social Justice, and the Department of Black Study, which he, of course, helped to establish at Riverside. His most recent book of many is White Reconstruction, which won the Phenom Book Award from the Caribbean Philosophical Association. And most importantly, Dylan believes in the right, in fact, the obligation of occupied, colonized, and incarcerated people to fight for their liberation against external oppressors, as well as internal reactionaries, and the parallel responsibility of those who profess solidarity to take all necessary measures to protect, defend, and advance liberation struggles. Of course, incredibly relevant, and we're so glad that Dylan's here as well. Our third participant will be the great Joy James, Ebenezer Fitch Professor of Humanities at Williams College, author of many books and many important interventions, including Newbone's Abolition, Captive Maternal Agency, and the Afterlife of Erica Garner. Her recent titles include The Pursuit of Revolutionary Love and Beyond Cop City, and James' numerous political theory articles on policing, prisons, abolitions, feminisms, and anti-Black racism include The Womb of Western Theory, which explores the crucial concept of the captive maternal. And then we will have from our own abolition school, Christopher Rogers, an educator and cultural worker from Chester, Pennsylvania, who serves on the National Steering Committee of Black Lives Matter at School, and is coordinator here in Philadelphia of the Friends of the Tanner House, and does incredible work in terms of Black heritage work, particularly in Philly, previously working with the Paul Robeson House. He loves Hakeem's Bookstore, the Black Radical tradition, and most veteran Philly DJs. He's also a key founding member of this project, an essential participant in its genesis, and currently co-lead for the Abolition Journal project, which we will invite him to say a few words about. So with that, and again, with an incredible amount of thanks, I want to hand it over to Melissa.
Hey y'all, how you doing? I know you can't really respond to me, but you can put it in the chat. I'm amazing, or these kinds of things. Yeah, I'm Melissa, and I'm virtually appearing to you from the unceded lands of the Kaw, Kickapoo, Kansa, and Oseti Sakoan tribes, commonly called Kansas City, Missouri. Before I begin my remarks, I would like to honor my ideological, spiritual, biological, and geographical ancestors who survived both in times of peace and of grotesque violence, who resisted oppression of all forms, and who continue to speak through their descendants all the way unto and beyond liberation. Firstly, I just want to stress, honestly, like how honored and humbled I am to be here. I feel very much like a baby in this space, to be very vulnerable and honest with you. I only got radicalized in like 2021 and 2021, and all of this is both new and old to me, right? I love this and engaging with. I'm going off script, by the way, so I'm gonna try not to like harp too long before I jump back on script, but engaging with the study guide from W.E.B, the Bois Movement School, I came upon like Gramsci, who talks about like this idea of the traditional intellectual and the organic intellectual. And in this space, I am definitely more of the organic variety, where I stumbled upon, scholars and speakers who had never, and writers who had never experienced before 2021. And they literally saved my life, and also affirmed for me that all of the things that I saw from my own experience and analyzed with my own perspective were honestly, we're already spoken about, we're already seen, we're already written tomes and tomes, and spoken aloud and in many, many spaces, which was a certain kind of homecoming to me. But I still very much feel like a baby, just, budding, or yeah. So like I said, very humbled and honored to be sharing this virtual space with illustrious radicals such as Joy James, Dylan Rodriguez, Gio Mayer, and everyone over at W.E.B. Du Bois. The work that everyone in this space is doing is deeply necessary to advance our world into the vision of liberation, community, and homecoming that I believe every individual has tucked in the crevices of their hearts. As it has already been stated, I am a poet, the first poet laureate of Kansas City. I still like saying that. An organizer, educator, and I am serving as the director of Be Real Academy, which stands once again for Black Radical Education for Abolition and Liberation. It is a freedom school started by our local Black abolitionist newspaper and community organization, the Kansas City Defender. Back in September 2024, Ryan, the founder and editor-in-chief of the Kansas City Defender, approached me with an offer to run this 14-week freedom school that he had been cooking up. And I'm happy to say that this weekend we will be wrapping up our first cohort with a camping trip on land stewarded by a local Black abolitionist farmer. The curriculum for the school began with the workbook created by W.E.B. Du Bois Movement School as its jump-off point. For my remarks, I would like to speak about how our program both overlaps and diverges from the W.E.B. Du Bois curriculum to meet the needs of our organizing and political landscape in our local Kansas City community. As I believe we all know, abolition is relational and meets the needs of the community you are a part of. This is the first step towards resisting the supremacist ideology of a one-size-fits-all standard that serves a select few and doesn't meet the people where they are. Be Real Academy's curriculum is a modified version of the Du Bois Movement School, as I just said. I'm very repetitive in this. Okay. The main changes that we made were to magnify the focus on Black scholarship and art, while also still including nominal voices in the decolonization movement, such as the Red Nation, the Zapatistas, and Paulo Freire, who are also included in the Du Bois Movement School curriculum. To put it simply, we dialed back the voices of white thinkers in order to tune into the tones of our Black ones. For example, to examine a radical analysis of capitalism and the necessary revolution that would need to take place in order to upend it, we turn to George Jackson's Blood in My Eye, whose analysis includes the perspectives of Marx and a slew of other folks, but most nominally includes his own, because we felt it was important to make it apparent as to how Be Real Academy was in step with the tradition and lineage of revolutionary Black folks in the US. As we discussed pedagogy and learning models, we did refer to Freire, but we emphasized the practice of fugitive pedagogy and Black study as discussed by Jarvis R. Givens and Joshua Myers. Another divergence from the Du Bois Movement School's approach is that we focused our cohort selection on having, and here I just want to interject and say, I'm going to let the Du Bois Movement School talk about the Du Bois Movement School in its like fullness, right? So I'm just going to like focus a little bit in on Be Real. Yeah, another divergence from the Du Bois Movement School's approach is that we focused our cohort selection on having an intergenerational Black cohort with various levels of connection to the organizing landscape. As organizers in Kansas City, we have identified a need for more Black organizers who also have a deep understanding of Black liberation and radical Black thought. So for our adult population, we wanted to primarily focus on people who had not been previously connected to the organizing scene. Due to the pillaging of Black education from our mental DNA through white supremacist, capitalist, imperialist, patriarchal indoctrination system, we also wanted to focus on the youth. As for our elders, we knew that the wisdoms that they hold and the experiences that they have had in the movement, as well as just living under a system that has always been fascist toward them, would serve our cohort's collective genius. With these focuses in mind, our first cohort ranges from the ages of 11 to 75, with one elder who is a civil rights leader and one elder who has fought for Black liberation since his youth. Oh, and our 11-year-old has had their own social justice podcast for kids since they were 9 years old. And while these students are potent in the work that they do outside of our program and thus bring that potency into every session, the true potency of our program lies with the rest of our cohort who have self identified as having been called the woke or crazy friend in their friend groups. In them, we have witnessed what fruits fugitive pedagogy, Black study, community, and authentic conversation can yield. For the whole group, regardless of their level of experience, they have reported that this program is transformative, healing, and foundational in building both their vision and their hope for the arduous journey toward liberation that lies ahead. I believe the spiritual blueprint for what abolition looks and feels like exists in what the Buddhists call right relation. The amount of rigorous compassion, commitment, humility, agency, understanding, intentionality, deep listening, patience, openness, vulnerability, accountability, responsibility, and belief that it takes to maintain healthy relationships are indicative of the institutions and systems that abolitionists are looking to build in order to live in a world that is truly equitable and just. I often say that the world is on fire. And it isn't my job to put out the flames. The world perhaps needs to burn. It is, however, my job to fireproof my community in order to be able to withstand the flames. And my community are those who find themselves, whether intentionally or unintentionally, aligning with the radical truths echoed by Black liberationists and the radical global majority of marginalized individuals the world over, the outcasts, the proverbial stones that the builders of this world rejected. As stated, one of the desired outcomes of our program is that we produce more Black organizers in KC. As such, a part of our curriculum also includes organizer trainings from local organizers in the field who are deeply aligned with values that reflect an intersectional Black liberationist ethic. Through this, we hope to give our students a taste for what organizing is and looks like, while also getting them connected to organizations doing work in our community. As we look ahead to the future of this program, we plan to gradually invite different marginalized groups to take part and engage with radical Black thought, starting with our Indigenous siblings, who I believe we have much to learn from, and without whom we cannot build an equitable and just home in these lands, and then branching out from there. Last November, I got to attend one of the classes at W.E.B. Bois Movement School in person. It was during week 9, the week on decolonization and third world revolution. In that session, Gio asked, "What does decolonization look like for the Palestinian people?" Which was kind of a gotcha question, because the answer, of course, is that it is for the Palestinians to decide what decolonization looks like for them. And so I believe it is with the rest of the marginalized world. As marginalized Americans, the best thing we can do for the world and ourselves is uncover our radical identities and divest from the institutions that have historically violenced our communities as we begin paving our own paths forward together. We've previously heard that to be radical is to get at the root of institutions of oppression and pull them up by the root. But I'd like to trouble that definition with my own. Perhaps to be radical is to be deeply rooted in one's identity, in one's community, in one's humanity, so totally that the height and the expanse of one's vision and ability to act, to create, to do anything extends far beyond the limitations of the carceral institutions that intend to stunt our growth and usurp our lives. And that is my case for why Black radical political education is paramount to the success of our movement. For the communities that we currently serve and beyond, it is important to call back to our ancestors and predecessors to recognize that we are continuing in a legacy and tradition that existed from the moment that colonization reared its ugly head. During our week on the Trump regime and the rise of neo-fascism, one of our major key points were that we have done this before and we will do it again. Not only have we continually survived attempted erasure or genocide, the disavowal of our humanity and the grotesque hatred that we see reemerging to the surfaces of our society today, but we have thrived despite it. It was Sylvia Wynter who said in an interview, if they, our ancestors, could have so stoically come across that middle passage, come to build a new world, to create the kind of music, that they have done, then there is nothing that I can't do. In the midst of captivity, the in the midst of captivity, our creativity and imagination has always been the realm of our liberation, but it can't just stop there. I always say that we are living in a white man's fever dream, beginning with the likes of Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who reasoned and wrote this society into existence from the comforts of their armchairs. So there is no reason why the Black imaginary and the imagination of all oppressed peoples born from our groans of dispossession and forced exile can't lead us out of this European nightmare. That is why at Be Real Academy, we also practice meditation and envisioning new systems and wholeness. And envisioning new system and new ways of being born from the wisdom of our wounds and the remembrance of our wholeness. We are world building, as we all must be, in order to advance beyond the adversarial beast of colonization, capitalism, and carcerality. And as with anything worth doing, we've encountered a few challenges along the way. And I just want to also interject here and say, like, the reason I decided to like really go into this program is because I think it's so important. I think it can feel kind of a little like befuddling as to how to make it work for you. So I hope that this can be some sort of like case study on like how you can kind of utilize the study guide to address your personal communities, right? So as with anything worth doing, We've encountered a few challenges along the way. Working with community, we are combating some, I titled it here, bite-sized culture. This culture of social media and bite-sized information, where it is more difficult to read today than it probably has ever been. One of our takeaways is not to just creatively redirect our students toward reading excerpts, that is part of it, but also to lean into alternative methods of engaging with these understandings. In future cohorts, we plan to engage with more of the arts and diverse forms of media than we did with this cohort, so as to not create a barrier of access to the lessons and the concepts, while also making space and time to digest smaller bits of text while in class to hopefully stimulate enough hunger to continue reading them outside of class. And at this point, I also just want to add that it is also like historical, right? It is a part of our like ancestral remembrance to remember how we did things as well, to engage with arts, to engage with storytelling, to engage with like narratives and song and all of these things in a way that brings us back to our root, right? Um, so we also recognize that retention is a huge challenge. At the beginning of our cohort, we had about 30, we accepted 30 students. As we round out our final week, we have about a consistent 15 to 18 students who have stayed through the whole program. A part of this is beyond our control, but we would be interested in reaching out to those fervent students that gradually fell away to learn how we could better serve their needs as part of how the program evolves in the future. A challenge that we face as our cohort wraps up is staying meaningfully connected with our students and helping them to continue their growth as community members, hopefully as organizers and as budding abolitionists before the program concludes. Because once more, a lot of our students haven't been priorly connected to one, a lot of the knowledge that we're introducing to them, but also organizing as a broad concept and practice. So we just want to make sure that we're like tending to our community in an integritous way to make sure that they can continue to or that we can help them stoke their flame to organize and keep them connected to both like Be Real Academy and KC Defender, but also to the multiple organizations we have in the Kansas City community that they can lock in with, or maybe even if they should see fit to create their own and organize around their own issues. We are having conversations about this with them in order to generate ideas that work for all of us. Certain things that we've come up with so far are things like we have a community chat so that every cohort that graduates our program will be part of a community chat so that they're connected to the larger group of Be Real students. Having things like cookouts, cookout never gets old, and also how can we re-invite or invite our students into future programs such as volunteering and things like this. So these are just things that we've thought of so far, but we're still troubling and like asking questions and being curious about how we can stay connected. As I close my remarks, I have to once again express my deep gratitude for the work that the W.E.B. Du Bois Movement School has done. Their inquiry-based model, I come from an education background, so this inquiry-based, but this participatory model, right? This model that engages and enacts one's agency instead of maintaining a passive audience or a passive class. I think Freire calls it like the banking model or whatever. But enacting the agency to speak. As we know, our voice is a center of our understanding, honestly. So their inquiry-based model, their political education, and their tips for facilitation, as well as the curriculum itself, has been a key factor in the budding success of Be Real Academy. And I cannot stress enough the power of community, of rigorous study, of abolitionist and liberationist understandings, of organizing, and of relation. I cannot stress enough the importance of connection both inside and outside of time and space with those who are grappling with or who have grappled with these institutions. I cannot stress enough the importance of studying these institutions of oppression in order to learn how to subvert and upend them. I also definitely cannot stress enough the power of vision and clarity. and the psychological warfare that has continually taken place in these lands to stymie our vision and clarity so that we cannot see beyond the walls that have been constructed around us. The beauty of relation is that as we connect our perspectives, as we share our voices, our capacity, our hope, our curiosity, and our sense of responsibility and play expand. And we can begin dreaming again. And beyond these dreams, there's organizing to make them the inevitable reality. And I'll leave you with this. The next time someone, even if that someone is you, tries to tell you to be real, because I have to be hokey about this, right? Tries to tell you to be real while insinuating that reality is the hopeless mess that has always, or that has been made of this world. Know this: the world hasn't always been this way, and it doesn't have to continue to be. Reality is always changing, and it is within our power to change it. As Octavia Butler says, the only constant is change. So let's harness that and reveal what it means to really be real. And that's what I have for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, comrade. And thank you so much for building on our curriculum, for working with us, for being in conversation with us, for coming to Chicago next month. For those who, will be at the Socialism Conference in Chicago, we'll all be there, putting together some workshops and some conversations around these things, trying to make, make reality as we live it, as Comrade Melissa is, allowing us to see. Next up is Dylan Rodriguez.
All right. Thank you so much, Melissa. That was beautiful. And I'm going to come back to this recording to just take in what you said over and over again. I appreciate being invited to be part of this. So first of all, I want to thank you, Gio, and I want to thank the Movement School, the Du Bois Movement School, for inviting me. I am truly, truly honored and humbled to be invited to talk about Abolition and Reconstruction, this Emergent study guide. I want to say first, and I know I'm echoing other folks here, but the release of this study guide indicates the significance of the Du Bois Movement School as a sustained project that has been undertaken from the grassroots in a context of popular, organized, semi-organized, and intentionally, secretly organized rebellion, insurrection, and uprising to generate a project like this out of a mass insurrectionist energy that proliferates is one of the most beautiful things I've seen in the last 10 years of political work. So I want to express my gratitude to y'all, not only for this book, not only for Abolition and Reconstruction, which I will be using in various settings for the rest of my life, but I want to thank you for creating the Movement School itself. What it represents to me is autonomy, portability, the seriousness of trying to proliferate experiments. So my introductory comments, the precious time I'll spend with y'all, they come from a place of study. So I'm going to speak in the next few minutes from a place of study. And the reason I do that is because I want to honor this book. As soon as you crack this study guide open, you realize how fucking serious it is. This book does not trifle with catchphrase bullshit. It does not mess with the formulaic phrases that at this point, academics and nonprofit industrial complex executives and funders alike love to circulate. This book does not simplify radical abolitionist, liberationist, and revolutionary ideas and theories. It doesn't do any of that. This book is serious. It creates a space, a moment, an imagination. So I'm taking that seriously. So I'm going to give you all a little bit of my own seriousness, attempted seriousness anyway. So I'm going to talk about two dimensions of what I view to be this study guide significance. First, I want to talk a little bit with y'all about how I read this guide in the context of a larger archive, I'll say, a larger stream, fancy term would be genealogy of uprising and insurrection, which is all the time and everywhere, now and before and tomorrow. So I know that this moment compels us to talk about the last 5 years. I'm happy to do that. But I also want to say the last 5 years are part of a cross-temporal condition of persistent and constant and unquenchable insurgency. So I want to situate this in the context of long uprising, long insurrection. The second thing I want to talk about very briefly, because I've been obsessed with it, is I want to contextualize the study guide by situating it in a specific theater of counterinsurgency warfare. And I'm doing this because y'all are forcing me to, because the first couple pages of the guide bring up the phrase and concept of counterinsurgency. So it comes up right away. So I want to honor that too and speak to that. I want to frame Abolition and Reconstruction, an emergent guide for collective study, within the theater of counterinsurgency that we can collectively understand as something like cultural warfare, narrative warfare. What I'll call it is lexical warfare, specifically. That is war conducted through the theater of words and language. Counterinsurgency waged through narratives, symbols, words, lexicon are as deadly and as violent as more common notions of militarized state and police counterinsurgency. Those are the two things I want to cover in the next few minutes. So first, I want to say this book reflects the existence of an already existing insurgency in Philadelphia and all over the damn place. There might be few better places and people with whom to start than Cedric Robinson. In 1980, Cedric Robinson invokes this phrase, he uses this phrase, he talks about the ontological totality that drives the Black radical tradition. Let me break that down using his words. Cedric Robinson says that this ontological totality emerges through, and this is his words, a revolutionary consciousness that proceeded from the whole historical experience of Black people, and not merely from the social formations of capitalist slavery or the relations of production of colonialism. This is the ontological totality of the Black radical tradition. And what is, I think, important here, and what I think resonates with Melissa's comments, is that when Cedric Robinson writes about this, he's talking about a larger context in the latter 20th century, which he phrases as the disintegration of Europe's global apparatus of physical domination and control across the planet. And he mentions India, Algeria, Angola, Vietnam, Guinea, Iran, Mozambique, and so forth and so on. So why bring this up? Because if we follow our elder intellectuals, like Cedric Robinson, what we understand is that he is indicating a global anti-colonialist, liberationist, Black liberationist, anti-imperialist, internationalist, revolutionary set of self-determination struggles that knocked civilization on its ass, that permanently destroyed the capacity of the project, the colonial project of civilization, with a capital C, to determine the terms of humanity, right? So what Cedric Robinson writes, again, he says the total configuration of human experience requires other forms. All right, so we start with Cedric Robinson, and I want to say, I thought about him as I read the Du Bois Movement School's Abolition and Reconstruction, because so much joy pulsed through my body as I absorbed this study guide. This book stokes a collective, rigorous sense of insurrection alongside what Cedric Robinson talks about as the multi-scale anti-civilization mobilizations, the autonomous radical praxis that permeate not only the 20th century's kind of cresting liberationist anti-colonial struggles, but certainly the opening decades of the 21st century. So I read this as inseparable from that ongoing moment that we are currently in already. So I want to echo again Robinson's idea here and say that I understand the work of the Du Bois Movement School and the work of this study guide as already being part of what I think, echoing Robinson, I would call an insurgent global totality, right? This is the messy, massive insurrectionist whole that composes this globe all over the place, again, in Philadelphia, where I am right now, in wretched Southern California, which is always on fire and probably should be on fire. The insurgent totality is already present. It is already humming. It is already emerging as the necessary other side of this place, of this civilization. So I read this book as part of that totality. I read it alongside the militancy, the rigorous theorization, the experimentation, the risk-loving activities of Stop Cop City, of I Don't Know More, of my comrades in Abolition in the Philippines, of Ujima Medics, of Michigan General Defense Committee, of my comrades in Brazil and Rise Up or Die and Tokaya Collective, of diasporic Palestinian insurrectionist liberation struggles, of the Pelican Bay hunger strikes, of self-determined sex worker defense, of abolitionist disability justice, all these things that I know so many of us are proudly familiar and with which we are often directly involved. So that's the first point I want to make, to think about how this book is part of an already existing insurgency that is everywhere all the time, precedes us, and will post-date all of us. It's humbling. Second point I'll make is that I see this book as especially significant in this moment because I think we're in a period of genocidal colonial anti-Black war in which oppressive forces are fully operationalizing the theater of lexicon, that is the theater of words, keywords, phrases, to destroy movements, organizations, communities, and people. All right, so in some ways that's not new, right? But it does force us, obligates us to come back and again consider what it means when repressive state and non-state forces use terms like terrorist, anarchist, communist, gang member, illegal alien, or even social justice warrior, right? When the forces of reaction and repression use those terms, make no mistake, they are waging war on you. Symbols and metaphors, words and lexicon, they destroy, they humiliate, they demoralize, and they kill. Abstractions, fantasies, aesthetics are inseparable from the casualties, the physical casualties that are created by warfare and conquest. And you know, to once again go back to the reservoir of Black radical intellectuals, there's no better person in this vein than Black feminist cultural critic Hortense Spillers, who famously tells us we might concede at the very least that sticks and bricks might break our bones, but words will most certainly kill us. So this is not speculation. This is not my own paranoia. I think this is entirely just a sober reading of how the planners and intellectuals of the US state and its military bloc have been relentlessly experimenting with counterinsurgency strategies to the point of telling stories to each other and the rest of us as they rewrite their doctrine and archive. You can look at the field manual, look at the US Joint Forces Counterinsurgency Field Manual. It's titled Field Manual 3-24. They have an entire section that's called Counterinsurgency Narrative. They stress the significance of political storytelling and the theater of waging war in the realm of language as central to successful mobilizations of repression, of insurgent and revolutionary and potentially revolutionary movements. They actually use a strategic framework that they call ISIR. ISIR stands for Identify, Separate, Influence, and Renunciate. And this framework is crucial to what we're talking about here, because what the counterinsurgency strategy tries to do is it expands an undefined spectrum of non-state cultural narrative apparatuses and brings them into the theaters of warfare, right? In other words, this is the state saying that realms like media, the university, the nonprofit industrial complex are all central to successful efforts to wage counterinsurgency warfare. They argue that this is how counterinsurgency warfare will work, that it has to expand significantly beyond armed military conflict, that it has to encompass knowledge production and information distribution as primary theaters of domination. So what we're seeing in this moment is that this theater of lexical warfare, word warfare, reorganize and redirects entire parameters of conflict through the conquest and colonization of words, definitions, and narratives. So if we are serious about confronting counterinsurgency, we have to be serious about recognizing the theater of lexical warfare. And in that sense, Abolition and Reconstruction, this precious, contribution, this gift that the Bois Movement School has given us, is a tool of counter war. It is a reflection of activated collective genius. It is a kind of urging for all of us that are serious to join the insurgent totality. And I'll stop there, and I'm looking forward to hearing other folks.
Thank you so much, Dylan. That was really, incredible. We're going to hear in a moment from Comrade Joy James, but we have a couple other members of our team on the call, and so I want to just bring on, another early contributor and collaborator with the school, particularly because we're talking about, we're talking about counterinsurgency. We're talking about the different forms this counterinsurgency has taken that Dylan has helped us focus in on. As I said, we've been touched by counterinsurgency in different ways, and one member more than others, and that's our wonderful comrade Ant Smith, an educator, a lifelong educator, a collaborator with the school, someone who was targeted by federal forces, who was imprisoned by federal forces, all as a result of his organizing in 2020. And so I just wanted to sort of give Ant the floor to say hello, to greet everyone, and to say a couple of words real quick.
Yeah, peace, everybody. I'm greatly inspired by the words of Dylan, who just spoke before me, and Melissa that spoke before him. Incredible. I appreciate all of the energy, particularly on one hand, the importance of participatory education, which the Abolition School could not function without. And then on the other hand, the real desire for revolution. Which is the ultimate goal as we think through abolition and reconstruction. Before I say anything further, I just wanted to identify how important of a space the movement school, the Abolition School, has been for me. And as Gio has spoken, I was, as various people all over the country were, face the consequences of being organized and participating in the resistance to state violence, primarily known as the George Floyd protest or the Breonna Taylor protest, but were happening in many other states and had their own legacy of state violence. So I have to identify that Abolition School was just a monumental force in sort of the support that I received. And then I want to identify all of the folks, all of the people that made this happen, all of the cohorts prior to this one, our previous facilitators, Saudia and Malkia. Of course, you gotta shout out Gio and Chris for developing this project in such a magnificent way. And our current folks here now, our man Chris, our folks, Talia and NECA and DJ, super grateful to be working with all of these folks. And then I'd have to identify the spirit of state resistance, the spirit that created the uprisings. And prior to Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, Philadelphia has had its own brutal interactions with state violence. So have to lift up the names of Walter Wallace and Eddie Idizawe, and Joyce Kwawie, and so many more people who have been murdered by police in Philadelphia and may not be sort of household names as other folks have been. And Gio and I gave a talk at Haverford, I think it was, not too long ago, and there was a student that was talking about, heard a lot about the Abolition School and really wanted to be connected to it, was really enthused by our presentation, and was talking about, how can I be a part of this? How can I do this? How can I come down? And that wasn't really practical. And what this reader says is that you have the ability to create your own cohorts with the people around you. And the ultimate goal really is not to show people that this is some extremely unique model that must be interacted through us, but that through the energy that we are creating, your responsibility is to create this energy in your own spaces. Honestly, of course, I can read as much Walter Rodney as you can. We don't have a monopoly on reading Walter Rodney or Asada or Lenin or Marx or Tony Cade or anything of that nature. You also have the ability. What we are encouraging people to do is to understand the importance of collective study. So it is study, and we want to be very clear that we are unapologetically focused on political education. It is study, but the community, right? The community, the collective component of the study is imperative. and coming out of the uprisings with intense energy, intense desire to engage without a container on one hand, and then immediately in following or in the same time frame as the uprisings, we are dealing with massive isolation, right? Because of COVID restrictions and things of that nature. So we needed the opportunity to engage with each other, but honestly and empathetically and with patience and the desire to actually grow and engage in each other's struggle. So I want to identify that the abolition school, as I see it, is a portal into better community. And community can be very amorphic. It could be a term that's just utilized uh, sort of weightlessly. It has no weight to it. And people just say, like, I'm in the community, I'm working in the community, I'm doing community work. But this is all useless if you are not developing long-standing, authentic relationships. These are the things that are going to carry movement forward. And if we don't identify that part of what is missing from organized efforts is authentic, long-standing relationships, then we will repeat sort of the shallow, like my status, like my post relationships, which looks like organizing, but is like avoiding the sort of the content of the organizing that needs to be developed. And through authentic organizing, through authentic community building, we can have a much stronger movement. And the uprisings, what the uprisings showed us is that the more people that we convince, and this is something that really stood out to me about what Dylan was talking about. In Abolition School, we talked greatly in lengths about hegemony. I'm sure that's in our most recent cohort specifically, I'm sure that everybody favorite term is hegemony, but we speak at length about the ideological warfare that we are engaged in. And as much as it is about getting people out physically to participate in the transformation of our society, it is tangibly about changing the way that we think and the way that we move around each other. And the immense amount of distrust, the amount of apathy that we have to battle is just as powerful as the physical and intangible state violence. So I am not advocating for one happening before the other. I am saying that these must happen simultaneously. We must believe, of course, in each other, and we must believe in our ability to transform the society as we know it into something that is actually useful for the grand majority of people and life altogether that must inhabit the earth. So wanted to identify one last time that hopefully people see this reader, they understand the reader came out of the practices of Abolition School, and they engage with the reader itself, but also the practices of Abolition School. It is your job to be participatory. It is your job to be international and intersectional. These are the pillars of Abolition School, and these are the things that will make sure the glue actually sticks. It is inevitable that we will see an uprising soon once again. And regardless of what it's in retaliation towards, regardless of if it is in retaliation towards what we are seeing in Palestine or the Congo or Sudan, whether it is the brutal police violence and murder that we see domestically, whether it is immigration or homelessness and all of these sort of social ills that we engage with, we know that it is inevitable. And our job is to create the sustained power for the uprisings to be successful. In the grand scheme of development of transformation, we see and we will engage in various forms of smaller levels of transformation until we get to the larger form of transformation. But you can guarantee that nothing moves people faster culturally, consciously, and many times tangibly. Nothing moves people like uprising. And Abolition School readers says that we come from a long lineage. We come from an extremely long lineage of people in resistance. So as scary as times may be, or as uniquely difficult as times may be, it is, I think, a breath of fresh air for me personally to say that the things that are going now have felt like hell, but I know that I come from a lineage of people who have resisted hell until their bones shattered. And I am moving in the same trajectory. I am moving in that same tradition. So for folks that are excited about the reader, I implore everybody to get the reader, study it, read together. And just as important as getting a reader is understanding the principles of abolition school and studying together, developing genuine relationships in community. And last thing I'll say is the difference between genuine community and the things that we've been seeing will transform the way that people have been engaging in direct action, been so-called engaging in politics, electoral politics. It will transform all of these things. We are tired of the recording of Black folks getting beat by police with no consequences. And we are tired of every sort of 4 years your democracy being at risk or whatever the presidents of the time are saying. And we are tired of being forced into scare tactics to move retroactively, to move in a reactionary manner without the development of something to hold us and fuel us that is not fear. So yeah, that's pretty much it for me. And I'm really hoping that you read, you study, and you act, and you move accordingly all together.
Thank you so much, and we appreciate your words, so much, and the sort of lens that you cast on rebellion as the motivator. Again, we said is the origin of this project, is the origin of so many things. We just got actually the word this evening that the police officer Mark Dial was convicted of voluntary manslaughter for killing Eddie Irizarry almost 2 years ago. This is never enough, we know, but it's also, and this is something I learned after the sort of murder of Oscar Grant, it's something that was reaffirmed in 2015, 2020, which is that these sort of convictions are never enough and they're never justice, but they're also only the result of mass struggle. They're only the result of our own sort of intervention in those struggles and our development of these the movements and their strength. So thank you so much for that, Ant. Now I would love to bring in Joy to say a few words as well. Hi, Joy. I'm not sure if you can hear us, but I think you're muted if you can unmute on your end. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Can you hear me now? Yeah, okay. I was thanking Gio, Ant Smith, Melissa, Dylan, for all their contributions, everyone that's worked towards developing the study guide, but also to develop struggle on the level of clarity, but also the level of commitment to community. I want to start with a quote from Dhoruba Bin-Wahad's recent book published by Common Notions. The title of the book is Revolution in These Times. This is from Dhoruba, quote, "Fascism cannot exist without a national security state and without an authoritarian form of government that has a national police force at its disposal. From the day we were brought here, the African community in the United States has been living under a version of fascism. We have this Frankenstein version of fascism here in America because we have the merger of democracy, so-called democratic institutions, with the corporate militarized state. Fascism has always been the marriage or the unity between finance capital, the rich, corporations, and the state. It's the state that has the monopoly on violence. It's the state that can legally kill people, literally. It's the state that can control dissent. Without a national police force, fascism is almost impossible. Again, a quote from W.E.B bin Wahad's Revolution in These Times. I want to say a bit about, the inspiration from all of you here, all of you that have been contributing, all of you who have built this study guide, which is stellar and right on time, much needed. But to talk about the policing, not just of our bodies, but the policing of our schooling. And so this is the relevance of this brilliant entry of the study guide, is that it shapes the educational trajectory away from the repressive state, or what it calls as schooling, which is really a carceral setting. And particularly, we've seen that at universities and colleges that have kicked out students for protesting against a genocide, or allow students to speak at commencement and then basically steal their diploma from the students, right? To this capture, right, of all this energy into the apparatus known as schooling gets flipped. If we think, and you have been thinking, which is why you developed the study guide, how do we insert ourselves into the project of schooling? I think that the historical framework that you're using, from W.B. Du Bois is spot on. In part because I think of the talented 10th, right? That the very concept of the talented 10th, and I'm sure everybody's familiar with this, but I'm going to be repetitive right now, that the very concept of the talented 10th was built upon the need to contain Black people and the potentiality or the potential of our rebellion after we had been betrayed, right, through Reconstruction, or the dismantling of Reconstruction. So the concept of the talented 10th came from Henry Morehouse, who was a white philanthropist, hence Morehouse College, the prestigious Black college, the HBCU for men, is named after philanthropists, white philanthropists. And then Spelman, the sister equivalent of Morehouse, right? Spelman College, another HBCU, is named after Laura, Spelman, who is a Rockefeller. So the infusion of white capitalism, the infusion of control of Black people who are constantly being hunted, who are constantly being dishonored, who are constantly being disappeared by the state. And of course, it's a radius that goes out. It's not only Black people, Indigenous people, poor people, queer, trans people, undocumented people, right? Become the prey while the state becomes the predator. And in this study guide, and in these weeks of study that you're doing collectively, there's the way in which I see you flipping the 10%, the elite, quota on top, that gives the argument, but also has an authoritarian voice, that they've gone to the right schools, that they have the right diplomas, that they have the right, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that is all, thrown out or repurposed or turned into compost to grow something quite beautiful, which is the capacity for us to control our schooling based in communities based on the 90%, not the 10% elite strata, but the 90% of the mass. And so this abolition school, this study guide, has a unique path of literacy towards the political. And I believe that in your work, I was able to look at it, have to go back and give it more time, for study for myself and scrutiny. But there is not just the historical, there's not just the political, there's also the emotional, which is tied to emotional intelligence. It is also tied to trauma. So in this schooling, I see a 360 wrap, a comprehension of the perils that we face in, as Druba says, I mean, it's proto-fascist or it's fascist, flip a coin. Either way, constant dishonor, constant severed natality, and constant death, right? And exploitation. So as this schooling grows, it becomes a pathway, a trajectory, right? And in this trajectory in which the talented is now the mass, not the small percentage, there's a way in which you're presenting an alternative to the elite universities. It doesn't mean that people won't be going to these schools to get diplomas, to get a leg up in terms of capitalist competition for jobs, et cetera, et cetera. But the beauty of learning is in the love of the people, the love for ourselves, the love of community. And actually, at this extent, this play that we're at in this moment, in this, atrocious game, that a proto-fascist system is laying out, that at this moment, we have nothing to lose but our chains. And, I can step back and say, well, that's easy for the middle class or the Black bourgeoisie to utter those statements. But there are different ways to disappear, and there are different ways to die. And the death of the intellect and the death of the spirit and the death of the love we have for kin, what, George Jackson referred to when he was having a conversation with Gregory Armstrong, who's the editor for the Soledad Brother text, right? And who met George, I guess, and spent quite some time with him a year or so before he was assassinated on August 21st, 1971, a year after his brother John had been assassinated in August 7, 1970. That there's a way in which George Jackson talks about the guerrilla family plan, right? That, we think in terms of our children, we think in terms of our future, that education is imperative. And so when I'm reading Jackson and I'm reading your structure and your contribution to education and pedagogy, I see that the family plan is for the communal. And the family plan, right, is comprehensive. But the family plan is also something that has to unfold within a zone of warfare, as Dylan was referencing, as Ann Smith was referencing, as Melissa was referencing. Again, we never started the war. The war came to us. But the brilliance of understanding that our intellect is a weapon for preserving our communities, for creating marronage, for protecting ourselves, for developing sanctuaries, right? That this collective learning, this collective teaching, this collective respect, even though we have disagreements in some of our analyses and some of our critiques, that this is our future and this is the trajectory. I want to talk a little bit about some work that we've been doing around COP cities and around counterinsurgency. And I appreciate Dylan doing the work that he's doing on counterinsurgency. This is probably a bit different. I'm waiting for Dylan's book to come out so that I can read it. But there's a way in which putting together small anthologies from people who are Palestinian, from people in the Congo, from people like the international swirl that is impacted by US foreign policy, that is decimated in terms of life forms, funded, that decimation funded through the stream, billions, trillions in war and predatory warfare and genocides and occupations, that in these collectives, in our conversations, in the study guides, in our conversation, and these small texts, I actually think this is the future of our learning writ large as a community that cares and as a community that is dedicated to its own survival for the Indigenous, for the Black, for ungendered, non-gendered people, for children, for the neurodiverse, for those unhoused. We have a long list here. That education is available to everyone, but revolution education or revolutionary education is what you have crafted. And that is the lifeline for the intellect and also for the soul. So in this small collective that I'm going to talk about, collection, right? It's called Confronting Counterinsurgency. It has a range of people. If you're interested, you could look at the table of contents. It's on the Pluto website, right? And so I'm going to read a bit from the intro with respect to the work that you've done and the acknowledgement that what you're populating, what you're seeding, right, is something that is probably radiating throughout the country and the world, that people are taking back what it means to be educated. So we'll start and then I'll stop with this a few chapters here in the intro. As more conservative and reactionary politicians and authoritarians come into power, the rising militarism and mercenary presence within and beyond democracy have become normative. We note the two-party investment in genocides and militarism, multiracial, quote, leaders, end quote, funded by billionaires who seek to become trillionaires. We see that authoritarian governance means that, quote, the whole damn system is guilty as hell, end quote. The duopoly of two parties is run by the ultra-wealthy and lobbyists. Supreme Court justices receive gifts and cash from billionaire reactionaries, judges who claim to reverse the Constitution based in colonialism's archaic controls over laborers, impoverished, undocumented, children, women, men continue to reign. Segments of all branches of government enable the state to menace and disappear the undocumented, non-binary, and trans people, racially stigmatized peoples, while imprisoning radicals and environmental protectors. The three-branch pitchfork of U.S. government, executive, legislative, and judicial, skewers spines and shreds fragile safety nets. U.S. domestic and foreign policies have subverted direct democracies and fostered occupations, as we know. Revitalizing colonial constructs eviscerates radical agency, civil human rights autonomy, and access for the mass to adequately obtain shelter, food, housing, clean water, education, healthcare, and the legal right to protest and resist genocides and predatory wars. With international insights and organizing, the contributors to your text, right, the study guide, helps us in terms of other texts, right, to be able to digest and comprehend how we build conversations, critiques, and confrontations to build beyond cop cities, beyond predatory policing, beyond deportations to terrorist centers in El Salvador. And it's our bridging, right? Our different segments of education, our different ways in which we communicate with each other. It's our bridging of our pedagogies. It's the bridging of our classrooms. It's the bridging of our study guides, which will allow us to debate, to strategize, and to confront predators in all forms. I want to note to the importance of, again, Du Bois's work, Black Reconstruction, you know, the agency that you keep mining, not like as a predatory gold mine, but you keep seeding and mining to grow in terms of our capacity as intellectuals who are committed to struggle. Would also note the We Charge Genocide document, the 1951 document that was delivered to the UN by Paul Robeson, and it was edited by William Patterson. I think that the way in which we will reinvent education, not as if this is the first time it's existed, but the post-war rise of our intellect after it's being subverted and after it being chained and after it being dishonored and denied in terms of our legacies, in terms of our families, in terms of our histories, is something that your study guide can, I'm going to use Ori Sami, like the tip of the spear, right? that it can pierce through all the bullshit of what is sold to us as education and bring us something that has so much more substance and so much more commitment. I'm going to end with a paragraph that cites Leonard Peltier. Potential political prisoners, and I know that in your teachings, in your thinking, in your rebellions, that political prisoners are key in terms of how you see this educational endeavor and also this political endeavor. Potential political prisoners were and are disappeared physically and or geographically. Indigenous peoples in the Americas, such as AIM half a century ago, and international indigenous people today, such as Mahmoud Khalil and Palestinians, suffered and suffer, resist as political prisoners to educate those who are not yet captive in the formal way behind the bars. Several months before he received clemency in 2024, Leonard Peltier, an ex-political prisoner, a veteran of AIM, shared with the public his perception of what it means to have spirit while being chained. His statement appears in the statement that's called Day of Mourning. It was delivered on November 24, 2024, the day of the colonial Thanksgiving. And I'm going to quote that and then I'll stop. This is Peltier, as you all know, who is now free, physically free, but who was always spiritually free, even though held a captive by a predatory state. Peltier, I'm honored that you still hold me in your thoughts, believe in me, pray for me, and want to hear my words. It has been over 400 years since the settlers set out to civilize us. They began by taking our blood, our children, to Spain. We were the first slaves in this, quote, great nation, end quote, built on stolen land, with stolen lives and stolen labor. The king and queen of Spain fell in love with our children and tried to end the slavery of American Indians. The colonizers used every loophole they could find. They did not want to give up the stolen labor of our people. They moved on to the stolen lives of our Black brothers and sisters torn from their homelands. Our blood, our sweat, and our pain will forever bind us. And I would also say, our gratitude to all the educational work, all the political work, everything you do to bind us, that stabilizes our struggles and it stabilizes our emotional registers. And so, as Fred Hampton and others would say, all power to the people.
For those words, Joy, and I really appreciate the resonance between what you were saying and what Ant was saying, about the sort of continuum between freedom and and bondage. We go back to Frederick Douglass, who, of course, when he stood up to fight the slave breaker Covey, said that he was free in spirit while he remained in chains. And of course, we know perfectly well the inverse, named by Malcolm X, among others, that one can be nominally free and mentally, intellectually, subject to, again, what Ant was naming is the hegemony of these existing systems. And so, we appreciate those words and that contribution to our understanding. I want to now invite Chris Rogers to say a few words about Abolition School, and also about the new project, a project that many on this call have been involved in some way or another. That is the recently relaunched Abolition Journal. So go ahead, Chris.
Yes, thank you, Gio, and shout out to all my comrades, a part of Abolition School, both past and present. We got some future ones, I'm sure, who are in the audience as well. And to the many folks who are here, who are engaging with our work, whose lessons I've been learning, for a while. I appreciate Gio. I got to update my bio because I'm no longer at National Black Lives Matter at school, but I'm happy that you mentioned it because it kind of gives me some context, and the conversation that we're having kind of like offers a good sort of entry point. So National Black Lives Matter at School was this project that was sort of like birthed out of Philadelphia in about 2016 or so. And we're thinking about, we're in this sort of like moment, the sort of middle of Black Lives, and the way that we have used Black Lives Matter for that organization is not, it was just sort of like, it's not always sort of like tagged to the BLM official network, though we were endorsed. There was always an opportunity to think about this moment of radical Black mobilization. And I don't, that's questionable. I know you could talk about that in the comments if you like. But what are the ideas, strategies, tactics, what is the horizon that is being formed out of that moment, and how do we begin to sort of like spread and mediate those ideas, particularly as educators throughout the K-12 spaces, right? We situated ourselves within this sort of like a fugitive pedagogy, a note to Jarvis Given's work, this way of like, we are working through schools and in sort of like these public schools, in sort of like these state institutions, but are trying to find ways to liberate, to subversively move through and create some sort of like freedom spaces amongst our folks, right? And many of the ideas from the folks who are here, like we need to be teaching about, people are now, afraid, like, should we be teaching critical race theory? It's like, yo, we should be teaching, let's teach Dylan Rodriguez. Let's teach the captive maternal. How do we bring Joy James's captive maternal into more middle school and high school classrooms? What is the type of, liberatory projects that come out of that work? So I was the curriculum chair and co-chair for a number of years of Black Lives Matter at School. And that was my work. My work was thinking through the many ideas that were at the, I look like the tip of the spear. What were the frameworks? What were the histories? Who were the ancestors? Who were the people that in the streets folks were drawing on to be able to, arm themselves with, to produce, different formations and strategies and different ways of caring for one another? What were the different ways of connecting these ideas across different movements, creating these sorts of like bridges? And how do we continue to spread that work across, many different communities? So while I jumped out of the sort of like, or sort of, moved on from the steering committee of National Black Lives Matter at School, like the work of Abolition School kind of continues that, right? And where we kind of need both spaces, right? We're always in this sort of dialectics between like, how are we, working through the institutions, through these sort of like inside spaces, but also how are we creating these sort of, maroon spaces on the outside, right? And what is the type of communication networks that need to exist between those two spaces? So that project, between the sort of like insides and the maroon spaces, it's like, what is the type of networks that hold those spaces together? And I think about that. I think about the ideas that help ground that. I think about, it's, I always say in Abolition School, it's not just about the content. The content is one thing, and I love what Joy mentioned about the emotional sort of like work, or even the relational work, right? It's not just about the content, but it is about that well, out of collective study comes a sense of like collectivity and collective relationships. And much of this work, right? All these ideas are going to be played out in the streets, right? We need to figure out how these things work. We need to, as we're thinking about our different campaigns and our different, you sort of like confrontational actions, like what are the things that help us get over the hump? What are the things that help us bridge our relationships to movements that are both here, but all like also, all across the world? So the work of Abolition School is really an emergent project within that, right? We're grounded in Philadelphia, and we are sort of like focused, on the sort of like city, but we're from that space looking out onto the world and saying like, what is the ideas that are helping us? Maybe if you will, they got this idea of like the, a flip on the cannon, right? That we also have our own cannons. What I mean? We need our own cannons, our own weapons, right? And what are the weapons of ideas and the histories that we stand on to be able to do this work, right? So I think that is an exciting part about Abolition School. I always, tell Gio I was nervous, and putting this guide together about the strategy. Like, I want people to see it that this is volume 1. This is us after about 2 years or so, sort of like saying this is what we have found to be useful for the sort of like collective and that we're stewarding here in Philadelphia. But it's certainly not exhaustive. It is certainly an iterative process. We're always growing. We're thinking of other, you know, uh, issues, other ways of bridging different movements together, bridging movement histories. There's work in there that jumps back to the 19th century, and there's also the continual work here, and we're always in the archives figuring out, like, okay, but what is the sort of like piece that works here, right? So that sort of emergent process, it happens with people, right? And it has to happen with people who are dedicated and are in this work, right? And that process is something that continues on. So I think about that work through every Abolition 101 seminar that we do and the many different labs that we go on. But we're also working on a new platform, a new vehicle, a new publication to kind of continue that work and continue to uplift voices and bring out new voices, new spaces for folks to reflect on their own organizing, to pull on different histories, and also just, also bridge into our own voices in some really like creative and expressive ways. So I definitely got to give a shout out because Dylan and Joy were part of the sort of, and Gio as well, were part of the Abolition Collective and this idea of the Abolition Journal. And Abolition School is now taking that on. Abolitionjournal.com. You can see the preview of that. We're working on our first issue right now to be released, called Everyday Shit. I got to give a shout out to all my working group members, Kayan Dawn, Gabriel Ramirez, Andres, who else? Sterling, TJ. We're putting a team together to really, bring this work. This is our pilot issue. It is something that we're figuring out how to do, sort of like a new movement, magazine sort of idea, something that bridges both deepening existing organizer knowledge and practice, but also about winning new audiences into this work. Please be on the lookout, abolitionjournal.com. We're also in the midst of fundraising to be able to continue this work. Our goal is to raise $7,000 this month to really serve as a foundation for it. So please, if you go to the website, abolitionjournal.com, you'll see all the information there to help ground and set as a foundation for Abolition Journal. We have a number of preview stories that are out. We have a lot more on the way. So be on the lookout. It'll be posted, Abolition Journal on IG. It'll also be cross-posted with the Abolition School Instagram. So please be on the lookout for that. I'm really grateful and to see more of this, the study guide get out there. And just want to remind people, like, it's a book. You know what I mean? Play with it, hack it, put new stuff into it, write notes, annotate it, cross out stuff, add your own pieces. Keep that sort of like process going because we want to learn from you all as well, because this is just the sort of like first one. And we're still in this process, right? It's a revolutionary process. And I'm just, really grateful to be here and thankful for all the words about this project that we've been building here, and look forward to continue to be in this work with you all. And yeah, so thanks for the time, Gio. And
thank you so much, Chris. And yes, absolutely. Please check out abolitionjournal.com. Please contribute to this fundraiser, which will really help launch and sustain this journal moving forward as a Philadelphia-based sort of outlet for revolutionary abolitionist thought and cultural work and creativity and reflection. And the pilot issue is really an incredible, an incredible collection already. So you can go check that out. And also to echo something else that that Chris was mentioning, we've got a crew that and a family that is growing through Abolition School. We've had more than 200 students come through our 101 seminar, which means they've dedicated 12 to 13 weeks to study with us, to study with the collective, to organizing together and to dedicated and committed, study. And, and that's an incredibly powerful group of, organizers across the city of Philadelphia. And it's also generated some really incredible leadership for the crew as well, right? We have a process of selecting former students as fellows who then can study and work with the leadership team to become educators, to become part of Abolition School. We had brought on a couple of fellows last year. These fellows have have done and contributed so much to the school that they're becoming permanent facilitators and part of this project. And so this cycle of students becoming fellows, becoming facilitators, becoming part of this leadership is a really crucial part of the dynamic as we understand it. It's an anchor for our participation. And we're incredibly excited as a result of that to be able to welcome one of our new facilitators, former fellow and even prior student, Talia, on to say a couple words if she's available.
Hey y'all, thanks Gio. You stole my intro. I was going to say my name is Talia, former student, former fellow, current facilitator. Hi everyone. Just to echo what Gio was saying, my kind of transition through the Abolition School has been a really wonderful, way to engage with community and also to develop my skills as not just a facilitator, but a learner and an educator. And the study guide specifically has really helped me in my learning. I'll keep this brief. I just want to echo statements of gratitude to Joy and Melissa and to, oh my goodness, Dylan. Sorry, y'all. It's a little late, long day at work. And to Dylan for such wonderful and beautiful words about the study guide, which, as folks have mentioned, is really just an offering for folks to be able to learn how to create alternative ways of knowing and learning and being in community with one another. I saw someone in the chat actually has started a reading group in North Carolina already with the study guide. So that made me really happy to see. And this is the momentum that we've been trying to create in Philadelphia and beyond. So thank you all for being here and check out the study guide. Thanks, Gio.
Thank you so much, Talia. Again, not only is the team a sort of spiraling, process of, students becoming facilitators and moving forward. As Chris mentioned, the study guide itself is a product of that same sort of spiraling motion. I say spirals instead of cycles because these are not closed circles. These are circles that expand, that grow, that dig into the past and build toward the future. And this is precisely how we understand study and how we understand the genesis and the future development and ultimately, obsolescence of this study guide, right? We think this is very useful right now, and we definitely want to encourage people to work with it and work through it as Be Real has been doing in Kansas City, as someone in the comments from North Carolina said, that they've been doing. And we encourage, again, people to get bulk copies, to lead study groups, to develop education programs, and to let 1,000 study groups and education programs bloom, as it were. I know we've got some questions emerging in the chat, so we've got a few minutes for a conversation. So please, if you have some questions, throw those into the chat. One that's already come up, and I know that people are already kind of hashing it out a little bit in the conversation, has to do with something that I think all of our guests in particular will be able to contribute some words on, which is the relationship between counterinsurgency and patriarchy. And I would throw in a sort of maybe a third piece of the triangle, which is community, right? Counterinsurgency, community, patriarchy. How do these pieces interact with each other? How do they overlap? To what degree are they, in certain moments in tension with one another? And how do we struggle collectively to resist counterinsurgency in the ways that are necessary to uphold not only an abolitionist and an anti-colonial, but also a anti-patriarchal politic. So I would love to throw that over to Joy, to Melissa, to Dylan, to say a couple of words in whatever order you all think is most useful.
I can speak from like a not like terminological perspective. So I think definitely, yeah, Be Real, something to be like very transparent with y'all about our selection process when we had like over 70 applicants for the first go around. And me and Ryan got together and decided a ratio of men to women, not gonna lie, that we wanted in our program, because we do acknowledge that, yeah, what I've been saying, and Dylan, I felt a little called out because you talked about seriousness, and I tend to use humor as a way to undercut. But I do want to say
Those
that
things are
like
not mutually exclusive.
yeah, true. But I've been saying a lot. I've been trying to change my phrasing from like I hate men to like to I hate what the world has done to our men, right? And we have to be realistic in the way that as we're doing this work, we can't like gloss that over, right? We have to like engage with it. We have to agitate. We have to be in like conversation and communal agreement of how we converse, right? So at Be Real, we did lessen the like amount of men that we allowed into the program in order to allow the space to be a more like uh feminine oriented space, more fluid space, with the like intention of we want to grow in the capacity and kind of like the muscle to be able to agitate and to be able to help like facilitate conversation that is transformational and loving and honest. Yeah, that's what I'm going to say for now.
I mean, I'll just repeat what I responded in the chat, which is at the level of collective study and organizing practice, praxis, and for that matter, collective critical analysis and strategic theory. I think we need to understand that the liberal paradigm that treats patriarchy, misogyny, transphobia, queerphobia, sexism, etc., those forms of gendered and sexed oppressive violence, as if they are somehow corollary or additive to an otherwise decent civilization and nation state, is completely bullshit. That those forms of oppressive gendered and sex violence are central to everything we understand about civilization, which is to just kind of, mirror back what Melissa is saying, right? There's no notion of gendered existence, whether it's the notion of a cisgender man or something else, right? Something non-binary, something that's anti-gender. There's no concept that is outside of that civilizational violence, right? In like every scholar that I've ever read, that gives us an archival analysis of what colonialism is and has always been, will constantly thinks about gendering and patriarchal and gendered violence as central to the colonial process, right? From conquest to everything that follows, including the creation of the civilizational form, right? So there's no outside of any of that, right? At the same time, I want to also honor what Kim was asking in the chat, which is, nonetheless, even as we understand that those forms of gendered and sexualized violence are central to civilization, those things are constantly purposed in counterinsurgent as counterinsurgency methods, right? I mean, COINTELPRO knew that. Like the folks who planned and ran counterintelligence program, they knew that. The FBI knew that. They knew that they could take advantage of already existing strains of everything from homophobia and queerphobia to misogyny, sexism, and interpersonal relationship abuse, right? To destroy organizations, movements, and people, right? Like demoralization is a central part of counterinsurgency. That's what that violence also does. So I think we need to have a really dynamic analysis of how this should work. And I'm going to say something that is probably, in some ways, is not my place to say, but I probably ought to say it anyways, being a cisgender hetero guy, right? Which is to say that there's also this problem that emerges in some of our collective spaces where where principled criticism of a practice, of a position, or of an act can sometimes be neutralized by accusing the critic of simply being sexist or queerphobic or something else because of the person that because of the identity position of the person that they're criticizing. So I think we need to deal with that too, and that shit is hard to do.
Yeah, I'm going to be off camera going forward. Sorry, it's like 2:00 in the morning right now for me. Yeah, I agree that all repressive regimes and repressive dominating practices need to quell, need to be put down in different ways. And hopefully the way in which we do it would have a way of, I don't know whether or not people believe in humanity, but anyway, a kind of grace and recognition of our failings. But I also, maybe this is why I ended up trying to meditate on the captive maternal, which I see as ungendered, and it's about a function. It's not about identity. It's really what you do. I would say when I think of Linda Thomas Greenfield, was that Biden's ambassador to the UN who refused to have a ceasefire, right? So that you weren't doing a genocide. Condoleezza Rice. I could go through, there's a long list. Maggie Thatcher. See, the way in which gender plays out, I believe all genders are captured by a predatory state and enact some form of predatory behavior. What adults do to children, what the whatever the conventional neural landscape is, just, how we treat people who are neurodiverse. I mean, there's a long line, the documented versus the undocumented. Patriarchy has allowed capitalism and empire to flourish. But I would say that our problems are more than just sorry, it's 2 a.m, more than patriarchy, because there are ways in which women are abusive to other women. And, and the way we abuse life forms, the way we abuse water and land and the environment. I think we should always resist all predatory practices. Definitely patriarchy should be up to that list, but so should transphobia, so should, recognition of cultures beyond the ones that we're trapped in, thinking historical cultures that have two-spirited people that give you models to think beyond patriarchy. I just want to be careful because I've seen the ways in which feminism can be launched against radicals. And I'm not saying that's what the person who brought it up was attempting to do. It's just I'm trying to be more careful as I age out and leave the planet, to understand how language can be used almost as a trope or as a splintering, right? I believe, increasingly that people who have a certain kind of spirit and care for people, everybody will make mistakes, whether or not they apologize and how they apologize and what they do to men, that's going to be important. But I don't want to categorize as if that was a unit that couldn't mutate, right? So definitely I'm against classism, racism, sexism, patriarchy, and could go down like a list. But I don't think that's the sum total of those of us who wish to change and go forward. So again, I think we all must be held accountable in good, faithful ways, not trying to take people out. I feel the accountability is important, but I don't want to be distracted by compartmentalization. Because I list all, Kristi Noem, I'm like, all those whacked out women in Trump's administration, God dang, those women are scary. Like, you shoot a puppy and now you're running Homeland Security, then you pose with all these men who are half naked in cages in El Salvador. The US has a very warped psyche, and all genders and classes and races are tainted by that. But I do, of course, oppose patriarchal violence, patriarchal dominance, but I also oppose a certain kind of matriarchal dominance if somebody agrees that it actually exists.
Yes. Thank you so much. We have a couple minutes left, and I'm going to, encourage people to, to make any last contributions and comments they have. I do want to flag a couple of questions, although we don't have to systematically, take the time to work through these. These are huge questions. Veril asked about the sort of abolition of racial and gendered identities and subjectivities, on this sort of question of the transitional nature of these identities and the fact that they will be transcended as the system is destroyed, citing Fanon in particular, and of course, understanding that those identities need to do their work before they're destroyed, right? Their dialectical work. And so how do we balance these pieces of the role of a transitional identity in a struggle that will ultimately be self-transcended? And Dawn is also asking about what kind of, living archives our movements are creating, drawing upon, while contributing to. And these are just things to sort of have in our minds as we move forward in making just a few, final remarks, if you'd like to choose the order as well, or I could choose it for you.
I speaks to Dawn's and shout out to Dawn, a really good friend. And this idea of like living archives, and a lot of my, Gio, you mentioned like Black heritage work is really centered in that, right? Like we need to be creating and recovering more spaces in our community, right? For this sort of guerrilla based research and practice, right? The work that I've done with the Paul Robeson House Museum was about that. These sorts of spaces where you were bringing both sort of like creative and academic study together, and finding ways to document that. You go on YouTube and look some of the archives of how we did that even through the pandemic. And I think and I just got to give a shout out to Melissa as well. Like the idea of like poetry. I was talking the other day about like there's a way of being able, I think, and particularly right now, I would rather get my news from poets than watching anything on television nowadays. So I think there's also something about lifting up the voices, and I mean poetry not in the sense that folks who are published in the journals, but folks who are really like speaking the and honoring the sort of like language and voices of a community, and hold that sort of like responsibility to speak on what's happening, and be really specific about it. You know what I mean? So that work is really integral to me. I'm still at Hakeem's bookstore as well, the oldest Black bookstore on the East Coast, 52nd and Walnut Streets. You can come find me. Shout out to Miss Yvonne. And yeah, I think like those spaces and how we create and care for and steward those spaces are ultimately important. And just going back to the previous question, I think also this challenge, right, of like collective care and strategies for collective care. It just can't be about, as Tony K. Bombara says, the revolution has to begin in here, not out there. So it's also about the types of questions that we ask in these study spaces, right, that are bringing ourselves onto the table and not just asking for a sort of like recitation of what other radicals may have said. So I just thank you, and really excited to be here in the space with you all. And I know we'll continue to be in conversation, and I'll continue to sort of be fans and supporters and readers. And yeah, if you got anything, send it over to Abolition Journal, abolitionjournal.com.
I'll say something real quick, which is I think the work of the Du Bois School and obviously the contribution of this study, of this emergent study guide, they do a couple things. One is they activate a certain practice of intellectual audacity, but by which I mean a kind of fearlessness, and a boldness without the guarantee of success, right? Without the guarantee of a victory or some kind of end product. Like that's what I mean by audacity. It's just the willingness and the courage to engage in an experiment that has high stakes for a lot of fucking people, right? And to not be afraid of what comes out of it, because you might fuck it up. You know what I mean? Like we might, not you, we might fuck it up, right? And this is the point that thinking about ourselves as part of a much larger and longer totality, right? Is like the point of experimentation. This is what artists, abolitionists and radical and anti-colonial artists have taught me over and over again. The point of abolition as a destruction imperative, the point of insurgency as like the preconditions for any kind of disruption of business as usual, not to mention revolution. The point of it is to embrace the possibility, if not the certainty, that you're gonna fuck up at some point along the way. Or sorry, that we are gonna fuck up at some point along the way, right? And part of the problem that we confront, especially in places like the United States and most of the global North, is that we are inundated with punitive messaging that tells us to never fucking fail, number one. And number two, to claim bullshit ass liberal fuck up victories all the time, number two, right? So what would it mean to name that shit as our ideological enemy and to understand it as part of an extra state liberal counterinsurgency apparatus that is trying to neutralize and pacify our potential wildness because we are so fucking audacious, right? So I want to say that's what you do for me here. And I'm like so grateful to have been here with you all today.
Yeah, there's so much I want to say and so little time to say it all. I think I want to use the entry point of language. Something I've been saying a lot recently is I think we often underestimate the power of art and storytelling, right? We often see it as like pageantry or like kind of decorative or like entertainment and these kinds of things. And I know we don't do that here in this space because that's why we're here in this space, right? We're like, study these words, study. But I think like the larger majority often does this thing that underestimates the power of a narrative. And I often try to get people to understand that like, yeah, this whole thing is built on language, right? The law is built on language. It's all language. It's all agreement. It's all contracts, right? I consider them to be spells, right? So like, and there are words that bind, and then there are words that free, right? And so, I just really want to lift up what Dylan is saying with this idea of like, you know, when we're thinking about carcerality, when we're thinking about like, in my understanding of abolition, I'm going to jump all over the place, so please try to follow me. But when we're thinking about abolition, my understanding of abolition, right, and like the historical like use of it is it's like abolition began to like end slavery, then slavery just like went into prisons through the Constitution, and so like slavery is still like legal in these lands through prisons. So like the first like materiality of abolition is this is like, you know, decarceration, right? Like we want to end prisons, we want transformative justice, restorative justice, these kinds of things, which are all buzzwords in some realms, but like for those who study and critically engaging with these concepts are coming to their own definitions, which I think is one a very important thing, to come to your own definition of things, to come to queer the language, to queer the meaning, and all queering does is invites you into the space in your totality, right? So like in this understanding of abolition as like breaking down what is carceral, then from the materiality of like physical prisons, we jump to the ways we are in prisons and are imprisoned in our minds, right? The carceral ways we think, as we've named with this, like with like patriarchy, imperialism, you know, these is all of the isms, right? That are all just like boxes that we are placed into. And so as we're like breaking apart these boxes and like I also come from a Christian background, though I'm an abolitionist Christian, so we don't do the institutions like that. But but there's a Bible verse that says like the tongue is the rudder of the soul, right? In this way, that language is like directing us, right? How we speak about ourselves, how we speak about each other, right? It either opens our minds, opens our hearts, or closes them. Once again, damns us, right? Literally, quite literally, like damns us and keeps us from connecting, right? So the thing that I'm like trying to get, I wrote like a bunch of notes down, is is that when we're thinking about freeing ourselves, when we're thinking about liberation, when we're thinking about abolition, and also connecting back to this study guide, right? The very act of coming together, the very act of like the importance, it talks about in the study guide, the importance of creating community agreements, which I cannot like stress. So like, I think anytime you do anything, whoever's involved should be in that process of creating what space you're cultivating and what the rules are for the space or the agreements are for the space. That way you have like kind of something to always fall back on, right? Like, but and then in doing so, you like everyone has agreed to honor that thing, right? And those things shift and are malleable and all of this. But once you get into a space like that, and you're not like really adhering to the agreements are just there as like a background, right? But like it's adhering to the presence of allowing people to be their full, complete, vulnerable selves in a space, and not to make it a safe space, but this idea of the brave space, right? This idea of being courageous in a space to work through tensions, right? To, as Dylan so adequately put it, like make mistakes. We are continually making mistakes. If anyone has ever played basketball, I always use this with my like younger students, like if anyone has ever played basketball and like the first time you shoot that hoop, like you're not gonna make the hoop, right? But you're gonna have to, and it's through the failures that we get closer to what the hoop is, and we can continue to make the hoop, right? So like this idea of like, how do we deal with when problems arise, when the patriarchy rears its ugly head, when colonization, when supremacy, when white supremacy rears its ugly head in our spaces. The thing is, they're going to, because that's the world we live in, right? But the reality of it is we must be brave enough to engage with it, because we know that there's whoever is saying these things, spouting these things, there's a human beyond that transcends whatever this institution is, right? That precedes whatever this institution is, right? And that's the thing we're all trying to return to. That's my belief. And so in the space of that, I think I'm running out of fuel, but like in the space of that, I think it's important to just like recognize, yeah, I just think like this study guide is a really good beginning point. Once again, change as it makes sense. It is all relational. And I'm going to stop now before I just start ranting and rambling. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all. Joy, if you've made it, heroically this far and this late in your current time zone, you're welcome to say a couple of words to close it.
My appreciation, I mean, y'all were worth a 2 a.m. moment. So thank you for all that you're giving. And I mean, I'm also a recipient, so I appreciate you and I wish you well.
Wonderful. Thank you again to our incredible crew of, collaborators, of fellow travelers, of, folks who have supported us, who have inspired us. Thank you to, of course, our team and our students, our broader Abolition School community. Thank you to Common Notions for publishing this study guide. You can find it at commonnotions.org. Again, if you're looking to lead a study group, talk to us or talk to Common Notions about bulk discounts to make this available. This is one of our goals, was to make this study guide available in the widest possible way. And so please reach out for that. And please reach out to Abolition School at any point if you want to talk about how to, work through these sessions or some of the material. And one of the things that we're trying to do is to cohere political education across the country and beyond, to begin to build relationships so that revolutionary political educators in this moment in which universities and academia are both, under attack from the right, but also complicit in neoliberal brutality and genocide, that we can do the work that we need to do, that we can step up and catch students who are being expelled, who are being criminalized, who are being, brutalized, and also to do the work that we already know, regardless, needs to be done in terms of building movements, building knowledge, and building analysis. So thank you all for being a part of this. Check out the study guide, donate to Abolition Journal to help that project get off the ground. And thank you all for being here. And we will see you all soon.
Yo, Gio, I'm just gonna say, Chris, I'm gonna say it out loud on the live stream, so that way I'm like held to this. I'm down anything. I have a very small skill set, but if there's any way that y'all can make use of that skill set to push forward or backward or up and down the work of the movement school, you call on me, and I will be there. I said it.